Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and last week I built up this Italeri kit of a IS-2 heavy tank, and today I'll set about painting it. You might expect that I'll throw my usual modulation, wash and edge highlight at it, as that is how most of my vehicles have been painted, but no, my other Soviet vehicles were all painted before I started using the modulation technique. So to match, I'll go without here. What that means is the airbrush is only throwing on a base coat of a dull military green, and after that I'm putting on some decals, as they really should go underneath all of the weathering that I'm about to be doing. In the instructions there are some nice colour photos with some sample paint jobs, and one of them shows the Combat Girlfriend tank, famed for being paid for by the girlfriend of a soldier who died early in the war, but she then joined up and served as the tank's mechanic. I think the name had to have been passed around from tank to tank, as the story is usually attributed to a T-34, not a GS2. But it's a cool thing to include, even if it's not quite correct, because it gets people talking about that kind of story. And oh, what on earth is this decal doing? Seriously, it's just folded up on itself and just being annoying. With a situation like this, keep adding water with your brush so that the decal doesn't set to itself. Try to kind of coax it back into a puddle of water, like my wet palette lid that I'm using over here. I fought with it for a while, but I did manage to end up coaxing it out into being flat and getting it back onto the turret. And I put some matte varnish over the top to dull the shine. I wanted to do the white bars around the turret, so I thought I'd use some masking tape, as I don't do that very often. And in the masking tape void, I painted it with white. And whilst this didn't line up perfectly, at least it didn't rip up the decal. Oh bloody hell, it ripped up the decal. Well, again, I soaked the decal in water to reactivate it, and I glued it down using some more matte varnish. I'm just gonna have to weather over the gap at this point. There's no other way other than repainting the numbers. For the tank overall, I have in my mind that I'm going to be using a brown wash later on in the project. And that would be good because it's not as harsh as the black wash that I use on my Italian and American tanks. But I actually do want to put a little bit of black lining in a few areas just to add some variety. I tried to be a little bit interesting and use some different techniques here and there, but they're a little bit haphazard and all over the place, so I won't go into detail on every single one. I also picked out the fuel tanks in orange, which is very much not a historical feature, but I really wanted some colour separation on this model. I also picked out a bunch of details with a dark metallic, realising that I should also add a black wash to these. If I'd have done things in a different order, it would have made a lot more sense. I also stippled that silver, as well as some black and grey and brown and white, randomly all over the tank, making sure to hit areas that would see more use, and also that damaged decal. What this stippling is going to do is the heavy lifting of weathering of the tank, showing damage and scratches and rust in the surface of the vehicle. The tracks, interestingly, are getting a black ink rather than my wash, which is also made from inks. But before I put the ink on, I have to paint the tracks in a light grey because I want a decent contrast on them. Finally, wash time. The brown wash made from ink is going over the whole vehicle, but I've actually mixed this fairly light. And what that means is that it's going to tint the entire surface of the vehicle and dull everything down, but it's not going to pull heavily in the recesses, and it's only going to lightly fall into the cracks and details. I then got the ink on the tracks, and like I mentioned, it's not my usual ink wash, this is just an ink, and that will fully darken down the entire track run and create some heavy lines in the recesses. But there's one last trick I'm going to use on the tracks, but I'm going to have to wait for the ink to dry first. However, the wash on the hull is dry now, so I can quickly treat myself to one of my favourite things, that little edge highlight, because of course I do. Although in this particular example I went really lightly, not going hard on any of the edges with the edge highlight. I took a moment to paint in the Headlight, and that's going to be just a little fade of blues to give the impression of the reflector under glass, albeit cartoonishly stylized, and a couple of specular highlights to finish that look. And after the ink has dried on the tracks, the last trick can be done here, and that is to hack up a pencil and scrape the graphite over all of the tracks. This deposit of graphite has a very dull shine, and in fact I've done this kind of technique on a Nerf gun a little while ago. I think that this particular pencil might not actually be the right grade for the effect I was after, but it did work. Certainly some experimentation is in order to make a more interesting effect. But we are basically done now, and I'm just going to stipple on some snow or white paint over the top. And the difference between the white paint under the wash, which is now tinted brown, and the white paint on top of the wash, which will not be and will come out white, that's going to give the impression of dusty speckles of snow. I mentioned last week that I was going to use one of the upgrade sprue tank commanders for this vehicle rather than the included one, because I really liked the one with the map, because I like painting tiny maps. Unfortunately, I didn't get any footage of me painting it. Realistically, this isn't a fancy paint job. In fact, it's very much the same as my line infantry. The trousers and shirt got a really basic highlight before I dumped a wash over the entire model. The skin was a fairly basic set of highlights, going from my purple to Caucasian paints. And for the most part, that was it. Just a super quick paint job on the tank commander. But with him being stuck into place, the tank is now complete. As mentioned, the tank commander is sold separately, but 8 infantry models are included. Now, secretly, these are actually my older infantry models, but they're built from the same sprue. I do quite like that this particular kit includes some infantry. It's a nice touch for anyone wanting a cheap diorama, or just a bolt action player getting an extra half squad of infantry is always a good thing. Quantity and quality and all of that. Hopefully I'll get this along to a game sometime soon, but for the moment, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.